roll it up, we gon' burn it down.
Hello and welcome back everyone to PKIdeas for the third round of the Australian Young Masters. This time around I was playing against a player named Ross Lamb. Now Ross, don't let his appearances deceive you, he's actually a 27-year-old who is a really good chess player. He's a candidate master, which he got in a zonal tournament I think, and he's rated at 1935. Let's get straight into the game. This is quite an interesting game. It's a King's Indian, starting off with Ross playing d4. Now going into the game, I was preparing a bit against Ross, and he plays a various amount of things, and it's really hard to prepare against players who do a lot of openings. So Ross can play e4, he can play d4, he can play c4. How do you prepare against someone like that? The best way to go about it is probably look at their most played games, and when it comes to players that are weaker than them, what they play against those players. So let's say my opponent was someone who played the Sicilian against people who are weaker than him, because he wants an active game and quite a sharp game. Maybe they play the French against someone who is stronger than them. So by that way you can categorize how people play their openings, how they manage their certain things. So with that being said, d4, knight f6, knight f3, g6, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, and castles. In this position I have prolonged either playing d6 or d5. I can play both. That's what's really good about studying positions like this, where you have the fianchetto. And you can either play c6 or c5 as well, and there are lines which go into that. That being said, white castled, and I played d6, and this is the King's Indian defense. c4, knight b d7, knight c3, rook e8, and e4. This is all pretty much theory here. e5, d5, and now knight c5. If you look at this position and look at my piece development, you have these two knights attacking this pawn over here, and you have this bishop which is fianchettoed. However, the only thing is that I have these phalanx of pawns all on dark squares which are trapping in the bishop over here. My rook is doing a pretty good job, but I think it's a bit misplaced. If the rook was on f8 instead, I could force something like f5 open by moving this knight on f6. In terms of my bishop on c8, it will eventually go out. It has two choices, either on this side or on this side. So something like bishop to d7 would be an important move to play. In this position, white played queen to c2. Instead of queen to c2, what he also could have done is played b3. Now after b3, a5, knight e1, knight fd7, rook b1, f5, f3, knight f6, and bishop e3. The position seems to be quite equal. I think it's plus 0.39, so white is slightly better, you could say, according to Engine. So f takes e4 is a possible move. F takes e4 and knight g4. Game goes on. Both sides have advantages. White's advantage is probably over on the f-file, whereas black's is his minor pieces. In terms of bad pieces, white has this knight on e1, which he has to maneuver around and try and replace. So let's go back to move number 10, queen c2, which is what he played in the game, and a5. The idea of a5 is to try and stop b4 from coming. h3 was played, and now c6. c6 is an important move because you have to challenge the center. If you don't challenge the center as black, it means that you don't have an attack. Your king side is pretty much blocked in this phalanx, I think, like so. The queen side is also clogged up because white's major pieces, the queen, the rook, and the knight, and the bishop, are all on the queen side. So where am I going to attack? Bishop to e3, and now I played knight f to d7. And now b3 was played. Knight to a6, a3, and knight d to c5. So I've got these two knights supporting each other, which is really good. And this knight on a6 is actually stopping the b4 pawn from moving forward. So rook a to b1. White's whole idea in this position is just to try and push for b4 and try and gain as much space as possible over on the queen side and eventually steamroll me. So here I realized that something had to be done on the king side as well, and I played f5. Now after f5, knight to d2 was played. This is a moment that I want to really concentrate on. After knight to d2, I could have played something really good. If you want to stop the video, go ahead and try and find something that is really good. Okay, I'll show you what I did in this position. I played knight takes e4. The main reason why I did that is because I saw f4, which is the good move, a pawn sacrifice, a positional one, and bishop takes e5, knight takes c5 is possible. However, let's say white goes for the pawn and takes right here. Let's take the pawn and then pawn takes, and now bishop takes. What I saw in this position is playing something like queen to f6. Now queen to f6 doesn't work because of the move knight to e2, and hence the knight is guarding the bishop. After queen to f6, keep in mind that this is a fork. Queen is attacking the bishop on f4 and the queen is attacking the knight on c3. So knight to e2 pretty much defends it. However, in this position, after takes, black had a better move. Black had bishop takes h3. Now after bishop takes h3, you have queen to h4. This is forked, and as you can see, the engine points out that black is much better in this position because he has completely overturned a position which was about plus 0.6 to a minus 0.49. So in terms of that, f4 was kind of a savior of a move, and ultimately that was one of the chances that I had in the game to try and go for a win. Unfortunately, that did not happen, and instead I played knight takes e4, which as you can see is a +1, and engine doesn't really like the move because it gives the central square on e4 to white, and now the ball is in white's park and he can do whatever he wants with the position. After knight takes e4, knight d takes e4, and now the game is pretty much plus minus. After f takes e4, knight takes e4, and I played c takes d5. C takes d5, bishop to f5, and you know, I've brought it back a bit. I've gone from a +1 to a plus 0.8. So I've managed to consolidate my position a bit, move my bishop out to f5, and I've managed to bring all my pieces onto the queen side where most of the attack is. So in this position, b4 was played, and now it's a plus 0.29. White shouldn't actually go for anything on the queen side. Instead, he should probably play rook f to c1, which is another developing move, and there's no necessity for white to attack. Do keep in mind that every time that you're in a winning position, it is always important that before you start an attack to try and go for the final kill, that you make sure that all your pieces are placed on their best squares, because once they're all on their best squares, that means that you are the most ready as you have ever been for a specific attack. So rook f to c1 was a better move. Instead, he played b4, and after a takes b4, I've equalized the position. A takes b4, queen d7, g4 attacking my bishop, and now bishop takes knight, and now bishop takes. If you look at this position, black does have the two bishops, however, we've both got two bad bishops. So the bishop on g7 and the bishop on e4 aren't necessarily good. This bishop on e4 is acting like a giant pawn, and this bishop on g7 is blocked in by the pawns on e5 and d6. So rook e to c8, queen to d3, and now b5. After b5, rook d2, rook c4. As the colors show in this diagram, we have two pieces attacking the pawn and two pieces defending the pawn. So the pawn here is all okay. The whole idea of black is to probably attack this pawn on b5, and my idea is probably to attack this pawn on b4. Whoever wins the pawn first would probably go for a win. That being said, queen e2, rook b8, and now bishop to d3. Instead of playing rook b8, I should have played rook to d4. And now after f3, the position is all equal. Following onwards, probably something like knight to c7, and then try and maneuver my knight all the way over to c4. If I could manage this position, then everything will be all fine in the end. However, I played rook b8 and bishop to d3 was played. And now bishop to e4. In this position, I played rook to b7. Rook to b7 wasn't a good move because it allows him to gain much more space and try and remaneuver his bishops and try and get better piece coordination in general. So here, as engine suggests, bishop to h6 was a better move, so improving this bishop over here. Bishop to h6, and after bishop to h6, which is interesting, unfortunately something like this doesn't work simply because of rook takes e4. After queen takes e4, bishop takes d2. I've got two minor pieces for the rook, and white's got no attack anymore because none of his pieces are on open files, and only the queen is centralized, and the pieces are not working well for white. So this is what I should have done, but instead rook b7 was played, rook a1 plus minus, knight to c7, bishop to d2, rook to f8. Now after bishop to e3, queen to f7, I'm attacking the pawn on d5, queen to d3, guarding the pawn, bishop to f6, g5, bishop to e7, and rook f to c1. So here white has managed to lose all the +1 that he had, and although he has remaneuvered all his pieces, he doesn't necessarily have an attack. So this is why in this instance engine suggests that it's all fine for me. Queen to e8. Instead of queen to e8, knight to e8 was much better. The idea is that you're going to maneuver your knight to g7 and to f5 straight afterwards, hopefully swapping off the bishop and going for a kingside attack. Instead, rook f to c1, queen to e8, rook to c6. So now all these pieces are coming in for the kill. Queen to d8, queen to d2, queen to d7, and now king to g2. His king is coming forward so that I can't really attack pawns on h3 and win free material. So he's a really solid player when it comes to this. So in a position like this, he didn't go for an attack straight away, and that shows the amount of maturity that he has about the game. Because the more mature you are, the more times that you're going to hold back on a certain type of attack. If you analyze some Grandmaster games, maybe you see Carlsen, maybe you see Karyakin, maybe you see Aronian, all those grandmasters that play in the higher level, the top 50 grandmasters in the world, all of them, if you look at their games, they don't have a single attack which is not 100% backed up by all their pieces. So if we're talking about maybe a kingside attack, all of their pieces are concentrated on that kingside attack. And also, they don't go for an attack if one of their pieces are misplaced. If one of their pieces are misplaced, they're going to positionally move it around the board and then place it on a good square like an outpost, and then finally manage to start an attack. So as you progress further and further in the game, the longer that you hold off on an attack and consolidate your position before you go for that attack, the stronger that attack will be. Now, that's not to say that works all the time. It works most of the time, but some of the time is of the essence. The more times that you let your opponent regroup their own pieces, the harder it is for your attack to succeed. So you have to try and find that balance between the right timing as well as the right amount of piece placement so that your attack will work. If we go back to the game, we go knight to e8. And now rook to a8 and knight to g7. Here in this position, rook takes f8 and played king takes f8. The worst move to be played in this position. Probably the last chance that I had. Here I could have used this bishop that I highlighted on e7 and done bishop takes f8, which was much better in this position. Now f3, knight h5, white is only slightly equal. He doesn't have anything major. I've defended my position. However, taking with the wrong piece can make all the difference after rook takes f8, king takes f8. Now queen to a2. Planning queen straight down to a8 with check, and it makes it really hard. And now I played the blunder of knight to h5, double question mark. Now instead of that, I should have just played rook b8, and I could have managed the position, but it's still a lost position. My knight is out of the game. My bishop on e7 is completely trapped. The only chance that it has to get out is probably this pawn on g5 or try and maneuver it to b6. Other than those two things, my bishop is as good as a giant pawn on e7. Here, queen to c2 and knight f5, plus minus still, doesn't change a thing. But knight h5 just quickens the death, and by this time it was only us two that are still in the room, so quite a long game that this was. Now queen a8 check, bishop to d8, and now rook to c8. Instead of rook to c8, what was really interesting that he could have played with this rook is probably playing something like rook takes d6. After queen takes d6, bishop to c5, and he's also winning the game that way. It's a +5, game is good as gone. But instead he wanted to go more solid, so bishop to d8, rook to c8, and now king to e7, rook takes, queen takes d8, queen takes b7, queen d7, queen b8, and now I'm just trying to swap the queens off. After the queens come off, he's got an extra piece, and the worst thing about the knight is that the only squares that the knight can maneuver around to are this square on h5, this square on f5, and if the knight goes here, 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 and here, that would be the square on a6. So you've only got 3 squares which the knight can escape out of the fortress that I've made for myself. So I've made a coffin where I'm just gonna bury and die alone. And still in this position, I decided to play on, and he had to convince me that he had to win. So I'm quickly gonna go through all the moves which are coming up. So bishop to d3, king to d7, bishop takes b5 check. I'm down a pawn now as well. King c7, king f3, knight g7, bishop d3, king b7, king e2, knight e8, king d2, knight c7, bishop c4, knight e8, king c3, knight g7, bishop d3, knight e8, f3, knight c7, bishop c4, knight e8, king b3, knight g7, bishop d3, knight e8, king a4, knight c7, bishop to c4, knight e8, king a5. Now he's just pushing all his pawn straight through, and I can't do anything about it. So next moves will pretty much go quite quickly. So knight c7, b5, knight e8, b6, knight g7, bishop d3, knight e8, bishop b5, knight g7, bishop d7, and knight to h5, bishop to c6 check, king b8, king a6, knight f4, b7, knight d3, and now unfortunately he has bishop to a7 check. And finally he'll be delivering checkmate after king to c7 and b8 queen. So 2 moves more in the game, king over here, and b8 equals queen is checkmate. And that was the end of the game, because I resigned at bishop to a7. I was like, look, you know how to checkmate with 2 bishops and an extra pawn. So that was pretty much the game. There is this saying that you can learn more from your losses than from your wins. And I think that was a good example, because here I've won 2 games and this is my 3rd round loss against Russ Lamb. So with that being said, that is the end of the game. Hope you guys learned something from it. If you did, please comment down below what you learned or anything that you want to add into the analysis of this game. And also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It'll be great help if you do. Hit that notifications button if you want notifications, or don't if you don't want to. Hit that like if you like the video. And with that being said, thank you, and I'll see you next time.